Hi, everybody. We're going to start our presentation for the night. So if you're not going to stay for the presentation, I'm not trying to kick you out, but I'm going to kick you out. I don't need your glasses. It's okay. It's ashy for lens. It's fine. I get it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Let's begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. So tonight we're talking about Christian moral principle, and this is how we determine if an act is moral or not, if an act is good or not. Because that at the end of the day, that's what we're here to trying to do. We're trying to do good acts and avoid bad acts. Do good, avoid evil. At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. And it can be tricky though, because depending on the circumstances and everything else, a good act one day could be a bad act another day. And so how this works is that we do believe in objective truth. So we do believe that actions are objectively, morally good or evil. But sometimes, like I said, it can be hard to figure that out. So we have three kind of criteria which we judge actions by. And that is the action itself, the circumstances around the action, and our motivation for performing the action. So all three of those have to be good to be a moral action. If one of them is evil, the whole thing is evil. So for it to be good, it all has to be good. This is the one where it's, one bad apple kind of ruins the whole thing. Because when we're talking about moral actions, everything has to be lined up heading towards the good. Now, to be clear, we are talking about moral actions, not circumstances. So, you can have, if you get sick, that's not a moral action. You didn't have a choice on that. So, if you have an accident, if you do something by mistake, can be bad. You can act. We have traffic accidents that kill people. Those are really bad. But as long as you weren't purposely doing something to make that happen, it's not a moral action. It's an accident. So it can be unfortunate, and some of the choices leading up to it. So, if you were drinking and driving, well, then you're going to be culpable because you chose to drink and things like that. But when we're talking about actions, we're talking about choices. So we're not talking about, it was an accident or something like that. We're talking about moral choices. So the first thing that we talk about when we talk about a moral choice is the act itself. And so it's just the thing, whatever the action is. Every action is something. And some acts are morally wrong in and of themselves. So rape is always wrong. There is never a time where rape is a good thing. Can't do it. Can't be it. Bad thing, always. Can never be a justified situation. So if the act is wrong, everything else doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you had good intentions. Doesn't matter if the circumstances were good. If you perform a wrong action, then it's wrong. And so if the act is wrong, and so there's some acts that we think are wrong in and of themselves. So rape, murder, adultery, lying. So all of these things that are in and of themselves wrong, and it's because by their nature, they are disordered. So if an action is disordered by nature, it goes against who we are supposed to be, it is wrong. Now, most actions are not wrong. Most acts are morally neutral. And if it's neutral, it's fine. So, eating a slice of pizza, going to McDonald's. I'm on a food thing because it's Ash Wednesday. Choosing purple rather than blue for your color pen. What kind of car you choose to drive. Like 9 times out of 10, it's a morally neutral act. And so if it's a neutral act, that's fine. So the starting point, like again, when we're trying to determine if something is moral or not, we say, okay, is the act wrong? If the act is wrong, stop. Okay, not allowed to go forward. Not allowed to go forward at all. So it's like, okay, murder. Murder is wrong. So, nope, can't murder, so can't do it. Now, we do have to see, there are circumstances where could be acts that look the same but are not the same. So there is a difference between murder and killing. So we can murder, which is the direct killing for the purpose of gaining something or out of some other motivation, is different than killing someone in self-defense. They have the same result and they might look the same, but they're different acts. So, if somebody is trying to corners me in the back alley and trying to attack me or my family, I have the right to make that not happen. And if that results in their death, and if that's the extreme that I have to go to, that's different. So of course, that's not ideal, but we would prefer it didn't have to be that way. But there's a difference between killing and murder. So that's kind of like a thing. In the same way, there's a difference between a lie, which is purposely for the intent to deceive, and having a surprise birthday party for someone. So you can have a surprise birthday party because you're not really trying to deceive them. You're trying to hold back information until it can be ready. So there's a difference. So we can't use that as an excuse to do whatever we want, but it's just saying that sometimes we can have morally similar or acts that look similar that are morally different. So murder and killing, rape and regular sexual intercourse, very different things. It's similar in certain aspects, but very, very different on the moral level. And we kind of know that instinctually too. And we can also say that certain acts carry more moral weight than others. So stealing is always wrong because it's not your thing, it's their thing, so we don't have the right to take something that doesn't belong to us. But there's a big difference between Bertie Madoff running a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme and depriving lots of people of life savings, and the little kid who goes in and steals a candy bar. There's a difference. They're both stealing, they're both wrong, but one has more moral weight because it has a greater effect and because it's on a different scale. So it's we can see that. We kind of, again, something we know instinctually. So yeah, we believe that there are big bad things and little bad things. And so obviously a little bad thing isn't as bad as a big bad thing. So that's the act itself. So again, if the act itself is morally wrong, then we shouldn't do it. If the act is morally neutral or morally good, then most of the times we can do it. But there could be circumstances when we can't. So again, let's say we can have a morally good action, but we can find circumstances that don't. And that brings us to our second one, which is circumstances around the action. So these are the practical considerations that, you can have a morally good act, but it couldn't be the right time and place. So a married couple, it's a morally good act for them to join each other in marital union and for that married couple to do that. They probably shouldn't do it at the bus station or at Denny's. Not a good thing. So it's okay, well, it's a good action for them to do. That's how New Life starts. It's a morally good act, but there are circumstances which could make it wrong. There are circumstances that you could see it. So that's obviously just an extreme example, but we can think of a million examples of doing a morally right action in a wrong circumstance that would make it not a good action anymore. So, giving to the poor is a really good one. But if there's that homeless guy literally right outside the alcohol store, and he's just going to go right in and buy some alcohol, okay, probably not going to give him some money. Maybe I'll go in and buy him some food and bring it back out, and so maybe I can change the action. But circumstances affect our action. So you can say, well, it was the right thing to do, but it was the wrong time. This is where the gift of the virtue of prudence comes in. So it's okay, the circumstances matter. And, this is also different depending on the different person. So, for an example, actually I'm going to talk about this later, but, it's if having a beer is, in general, fine. But if I'm an ambulance driver and I'm about to start a 9-hour shift, nope, shouldn't have any. Now, if I just got off my shift and I'm going to a birthday party, okay, fine. So it's the same action, but it's in different circumstances. So we have to consider that all. And we have to consider all of the circumstances too, because it's not enough to say, oh, I didn't think that through. Because if it's something that we should foresee, well, then that can affect it. So it's oh, I didn't think I was going to get called out tonight. Okay, but you might have. And so it's oh, I didn't think it was going to go bad. Well, that's why we have to think out our actions. So ignorance is not an excuse most of the time. So those are the two first things. So the act, the circumstances around it. And again, this makes logical sense. If it has to be, so If it's wrong, you got to stop at the act. Okay, if it's right or neutral, it's fine, but the circumstances are doing it. Having that first slice of pizza is fine. I've already had 7. Ooh, maybe now it's now time to stop. So you can see that the circumstances change the act. And then the final thing is the motivation. So the motivation is the ends desired. Because we are people, because we're not animals based on instinct, because we have free will, what we are trying to accomplish matters. So what we are doing it. Now, this is different than the actual ends achieved, but it's about what we are trying to do. So the first and foremost, ends never justify the means. So I can't do evil so that good may come of it. You know, if I have a rich uncle who's really greedy and he's refused to give us any money, and I know he's going to leave all his money to me, I don't get to kill him so that I inherit the money so I can give it to the poor. Don't get to do that. Be wrong. You know, and that's obviously an extreme example, but it's just like, okay, I don't get to do evil so that good may come of it. Doesn't work like that. So you don't do it. So the ends never justify the means. Doesn't matter if they're the best ends in the world. Doesn't matter if I think it's going to usher in utopia. I don't get to do it because by doing an evil act, you are corrupting anything that comes from it at the end of the day. So on the flip side of that is, you know, we might not achieve the ends we're actually seeking. So I can have good desires, but we have learned time and time again that these actions don't lead to that. So, okay, then we need to adjust our thinking. So, you know, I want to help the poor. And so we've tried this program, you know, that we think is going to help the poor. And after 3 years, we realize it's not helping the poor. Okay, because it's causing other problems. Okay, well, then we need to shift and not do that anymore. You know, you can see that with invasive species. Oh, it would be a great idea to introduce rabbits to New Zealand because there's no rabbits. And then they start eating everything and destroying everything. They had a good intention, but it had unforeseen circumstances, and it created more problems. So they should have thought that out better. So there's that aspect of motivation. The big aspect for motivation too is if my motivation is wrong, it doesn't matter if the circumstances are right. It doesn't matter if the act itself is right. If I'm doing it for the wrong reasons, then the act becomes wrong. So that was our gospel today, you know? If I'm giving to the poor just because it makes me look good in front of everybody, you've already received your reward. So you're not doing it. So this is you see this every year when election comes around. All the politicians suddenly start volunteering at soup kitchens, and suddenly they're all doing this, and they're all doing that. And you know, it's funny how that always happens right around election time, that all the politicians suddenly start doing a lot more volunteer work and are out with the people and all that kind of stuff. I wonder if their motivation could be a little suspect. And so obviously we know they're just doing it for the accolades and doing it to try to win votes and that kind of stuff. So you kind of lose points for that. You don't get to do solely for that. Now, we can, because we're complicated creatures, sometimes we have multiple motivations, and that's okay too. So if one of our motivations is not perfect, but our main one is, you know, we're coming up on Lent and we're doing fasting. So, you know, the main idea of fasting is the spiritual benefit. But if I know going in I'm going to fast, and I might actually put a little diet in place, I might lose a little weight at the same time, that's fine. Now, if there's a secondary thing, I'm going to fast, and I think it's going to be spiritually good for me, but then I'm also going to lose weight, and that's going to let me look better so that I can go seduce this other person, well, that's bad. So we have multiple, so all of our things have to be aligned correctly. If our motivations are neutral or good, fine. It's fine. But if our motivations are for the wrong reasons, that corrupts the act. So it's again, the ends might end up being fine. It might end up like in the world, the end result might be a physically good thing. You know, if those politicians go and clean at that volunteer or give money to that poorhouse, they still did it, and it might have done it. They might have done it for the wrong reasons. So, but that still is not a morally justifiable act, still not a morally good act, because they're not doing it for the right reasons. So those are the big three. So it's the act itself. The act itself has to be good. So if the act isn't good, you stop there. The circumstances around the act. Is this the right time and place to do this act? Okay, if it's good, okay, check 2, we can keep moving. Am I doing it for the right reasons? And check 3. And so that can be the harder one because sometimes we don't know ourselves as well as we want to. And so, but it's easy, sometimes then we check it up too. So it's like, oh, sometimes I'll give myself an excuse for a motivation. Like, oh, well, I really want, you see this people who are trying to justify having an affair. Well, I've fallen out of love with my wife. Well, I really love my secretary now. And you're like, nope, act still wrong. Sorry, go work with your wife and get some stuff taken out. Go to counseling or do something. Get it figured out. That doesn't mean there doesn't need to be other work to be done. But, it doesn't matter how good your motivations are. That doesn't justify anything else you do. So all three have to be in alignment for it to be a moral act. Okay. So we already did the real world example. So some easy world examples of this are food. So I kind of talked about this already. So, food is inherently a morally good thing. And eating in itself is a morally good thing. And it's because we need it to survive. So it's good for us to do it. But we've all been in a position where we can see how we do it is wrong. So we can say, okay, eating is good. Check. Ooh, 7th slice of pizza. Probably not good. Okay, so maybe I'm just having 2 slices of pizza, but I'm having that last slice of pizza just because I don't want Jerry to take it, because Jerry always takes the last slice. So I'm going to do it just to kind of grudge it at him. Well, now you're not doing it for, it's like, I am hungry, but I'm really just doing it to spite Jerry. And so it's just like one of those things. It's just like, okay, well then we're not doing it for the right reasons. And so it's like, it's making all that. Same thing is with sex. It's an easy example of sex is a morally good thing, the sexual act, because again, we need it for creation. Without it, we don't do it. But we've all can understand how the goodness of sex can be abused very easily. And in fact, oftentimes, the greater the act, the greater importance it is, the greater it can be corrupted. So sex is a good example. Again, one of the highest good things we can do is a married couple performing the marital act in love to create new life. You're literally creating life, you're touching the divine, beautiful. But it's really easy to go wrong really easily. Alcohol is another really good example of that. Alcohol is a good thing between disinfectant and loosening you up and all that kind of stuff. Really easy to abuse, though. Really easy to abuse. So same thing, we have, leadership. Having good leaders is so important, and having them lead and having them lead well. So easy to be corrupted. Again, those politicians and priests are an example of that. We don't have to go very far to think of corrupt priests. And so it's all that kind of thing. If anyone who's in that authority, if you're given that authority, if you're given that position, it's easy to abuse. And so it's like the most morally good acts we can do, it's also the most bad they can be turned on. It's in the same way that, a lot of saints talk about how your greatest vice could also be your greatest virtue. So once you turn it, if you can turn it towards the good, you can turn it towards something amazing. So it's like some of those ones who are the greatest sinners, once they convert, become the greatest saints, because with that, how they were plowing down their sins, now they're doing it towards virtue. So it's all that kind of stuff too. So it's all that reminder that like all these things. And again, some have higher moral value than others, and that's okay. So, okay, some points to consider when we're thinking about more morality is legality is not morality. So just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. And this is very easy to think of lots of examples. I'm going to use an easy one that we can all agree on. Slavery. So slavery was legal. Didn't make it right. It was never right. It was legal, and it was the normal way of doing things for most of human history. There were slaves. It's actually kind of a miracle, in fact, that we managed to get rid of it and there still are. There are more slaves today than there were 1,000 years ago, actually, because we have a bigger population. But there are still lots of slaves today in certain countries. So that doesn't make it right. So just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. And we, of course, can talk about abortion. We can, of course, talk about a lot of other things. But we'll just use that as an easy one, that legality. So my excuse is, well, it's allowed. That doesn't matter. So, something could be culturally allowed, something could be legally allowed. That doesn't mean it's morally right. And so we're always trying to challenge our culture to be better at that. And sometimes we swing one direction and we get better in some areas, and then we swing in the other direction and get worse in others. And so it's always that. And so that's okay. This comes up too, because this comes up kind of funny when people are like, oh, we live in the worst age ever. And I'm like, no, we don't. Again, we figured out that racism was bad. That's new. We're not perfect at it yet. We're still working on it. But the fact that we know it's bad, that's monumentally different. We got rid of slavery for the most part. We realized it's bad. And even in countries that have it, it's like under the table, so we understand that. So it's like, at least we realize it's bad. So it's like, we have things that we have to work on our culture? Sure. But that doesn't mean that we have a bad culture. All cultures have problems, all things that we have it, and I'd rather live in our culture than almost any other culture in human history. And so we have a good culture, and we should be happy about that. Does it need to be perfected? 100%. We're going to keep fighting to perfect it? Yep. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the good or the bad of the other generations too. Life is complicated, is what it comes down to. So, legal. Just because something's legal doesn't mean you get to do it. The other thing we have to distinguish is sometimes and how evil, when we talk about evil. So evil doesn't always mean moral evil. There's a difference between natural evil and moral evil. So evil in the broad sense, and you'll see this used biblically a lot, is anything bad that happens. So evil happened, and a volcano blowing up and destroying a bunch of villages in Guatemala is evil. It's not morally evil because no one made a choice to do that, but it's moral. But it's still an evil thing. A baby born blind is evil. It's evil in that it's wrong. It shouldn't be. And you can have actions that are evil but are not morally evil. So again, you get in a car accident and you end up killing someone. That's evil. It's not morally evil. You don't need to go to confession for it. Unless you put yourself into a bad position, but sometimes, we're in bad circumstances. So it's that. So that's different than moral evil. Moral evil is always a choice. So when we talk about moral evil, getting rid of moral evil, that's the choice that comes from our free will. So that's the separation. And it's an important distinction mostly because for a few things. First of all, it helps us to realize that there is going to be evil in the world no matter what, in the grand sense, because we're never going to have perfect, division of wealth. We're never going to have everyone live in the right areas and all that kind of stuff too. So volcanoes are going to explode, hurricanes are going to come, things like that are always going to happen. And sometimes bad stuff just happens to bad people. That's the whole point of, bad stuff happens to good people. That's literally the entire book of Job is bad stuff happens to good people. We just got to deal with it. And so that's kind of the point. Now, what we as Christians are trying to diminish and get rid of in ourselves first, and then the people around us second, is moral evil. So if we can fix that helps a lot of other areas. So that's the difference between moral evil and regular evil. And that's what we can judge too. So this is a kind of thing. When Jesus says we don't judge people, because we can't judge a person because we don't know their motivations, we don't know their circumstances, we don't know everything that led them up to that person, because we're bad at knowing all of the things. And so we can't judge people based on their actions. Now, we can judge the actions. We see Jesus judge actions all the time when he says, go and sin no more. He's judging previous actions. We can see when he was talking to the woman at the well, when he says, you've had 5 husbands. He's judging her for choices she's made that were not morally right, and how he's done it. When he says, there's a bunch of times when you have those big lists of different sins that we shouldn't do. So we can all have and he calls out hypocrites and scribes for being unjustified. Again, in our gospel today, when he calls out people for being hypocrites and showing off their wealth and showing off their piety and not being true to their religion. So he's calling out them. Now, what we aren't supposed to do when he says don't judge is don't judge the person. Because when we judge the person, we're saying, oh, you've done this act. That means you're that bad. We are more than our worst action. That's one of the beautiful things about our church is we are more than our worst action. We are more than our worst day. Sometimes, and why we don't judge... We don't judge because we don't know the full circumstance and how it's going to play out either. So sometimes we're meeting Saul before he becomes Paul. It was wrong for Saul to persecute the Christians. It was really good that he converted and became Paul. And so you could have said in the early church, Saul is doing bad things. He is doing morally evil things. Paul will say, I did morally evil things, and it was wrong for me to do them. But now he's like, but now I've converted, and now I'm trying to make up for them, and now I'm doing morally good. So that's why we can judge actions, we can't judge people. Also, when it comes to moral actions too, there is a hierarchy of goods. And what we mean by this is sometimes there is more than one right solution, and that's okay. So we don't have to do the best solution every single time. As long as it's good, it's good. So, an easy example, you're giving, we have the diocesan appeal. We're asking everyone to give money. And okay, so I'm going to give $200. Well, that's great. And maybe I'm going to decide to give $300. Okay, well, that's more generous for that person, again, depending on their circumstances and everything. But that doesn't mean that giving $200 would have been wrong. It just means that it's still good. So, we can do, sometimes there's complicated situations where there's more than one right answer, and that's okay. So we don't have to choose the absolute perfect answer. We just have to be choosing good. That's all we have to do. That's all God asks for us. And sometimes we can be in situations too where there is no good answer. Sometimes we can be in a situation, it's really easy to get lost in hypotheticals. Well, what if I'm on, it's like the train where you pull the lever and then other people die and all that kind of stuff. There's all these circumstances where you could be in where it's like, what's the right answer? And sometimes because we live in a fallen world and because we're interacting with other people, we could be placed in a situation based on others' actions or because of happenstance where there is no good answer. And that's okay. Then we do our best. Then we follow our conscience and we do our best. And that's why we try to form. And at the end of the day, that's the number one thing that the church asks us to do is follow our conscience. Now, that means we need to form our conscience well, and we form it by going to church. We form it by understanding moral actions. We form it by educating ourselves so that we don't fall into our base instincts. But we are called to follow our conscience. So, especially in families, when there's you have somebody who has cancer and they're older and, okay, should we try to fight it or not? There's not a good answer there. If they want to fight for every single minute they have and do every single procedure, fine, that's fine. If they want to say, I've lived a good life, I'm ready for it, I'm going to accept this and kind of just spend comfortably the last time with my family, that's fine too. There's not one right answer. There's a multitude of answers. And sometimes, and obviously that's a bad situation, there's no great situation either. No matter what, that person's life is going to be not great. So there's not an easy answer there. And so that's why, again, you have to come up with the moral decision. And that's why, people are, Father, what's the right in this hypothetical situation? I'm like, I don't know. And it's really easy to get lost in hypotheticals. You can come up with a million different ones of hypothetical situations that you can get lost into. So I would encourage you not to get lost in hypotheticals and try to think about your own life and form your conscience well. And when the circumstances come, you respond. Okay, under that forming of conscience, we talked about ignorance a little bit. There's two forms of ignorance. There's vincible and invincible. I bet you didn't know that invincible actually comes from vincible, so invincible means you can't defeat it. Vincible means it's defeated. So that word doesn't get used very often, but it is actually a word. So when we talk about invincible ignorance, it means that you couldn't have known better, that you had perfect ignorance of a situation, so you couldn't have known better. So, if you talk about like medical practices in the ancient world that did more harm than good, and they did more harm than good. Okay, they couldn't have known better. They were trying to do what's best, so it wouldn't be a moral sin because they're trying their best and they had no way of knowing anything else. Okay, in the modern world, trying to do that would probably be questionable because you might be ignorant, but you know better. So it's like one of those, if the information was available and you chose to ignore it, well, you might be ignorant, but that doesn't mean you're not culpable. You still might be culpable. You still might be blamed if the information was there and you just chose to ignore it. So, you see the signs of your neighbor doing something shady next door, and you're like, oh, I'm just not going to go look into it because I don't want to know what the result is because then I might have to do something. I might have to end up calling the cops or something, and I don't want to have to do that. So I'm just going to ignore it. Okay, I'm just going to ignore it. That's vincible. You okay. That doesn't mean you have to be nosy, but it means like, no, we are our brother's keeper, So it's like that. So there's a difference between invincible, you couldn't have possibly known, invincible, which is like, you could have known, but you chose not to. So if just because you were ignorant about something doesn't mean that it's automatically takes away your moral culpability. If you could have known and you should have known, you still could be culpable. Finally, I want to put in, this is an important one, is the role of emotions and temptations. So this is one that sometimes we often mix up with morality. So emotions are not moral one way or the other. They can be ordered or disordered, but the emotion isn't sinful, it's what we do with it. So, I could have, all emotions are supposed to direct us towards some good in some way. You get angry because you're responding to what you perceive to be an unfair, unjust, bad circumstance. So sometimes anger is the right reaction. When we hear about child abuse, the right response is anger. You should be angry when you see that. The right response when we hear about corruption in the government or in the church should be angry. We should be angry when that happens. And it should drive us to make changes, kick that politician out, call out that priest and get him removed if he's doing something wrong. And we need to do those things. And so it's like, okay, so sometimes anger can be a good thing, we should hate evil. It's good to hate evil, and we should try to correct it. Now, when we have emotions, what we do with them can then be bad, though. So it's like, okay, so I'm angry, so I lost my temper. See, okay, now we even have it in our language. I lost my temper. So when the emotion gets the control, when I'm not in control of myself, then we can say, okay, then you're letting the emotion rule you. That can be sinful. And that can go for both the negative emotions. I lost my temper and I hit somebody. Well, that's wrong, and that's morally wrong. But that can also go in the other way. We can have morally good ones. Oh, yeah, this pizza, again, we'll use pizza. That pizza was just so good, I couldn't help but eating that 8th slice because it tasted so good, and I just wanted it so much. Okay, that's bad too. So just because something is a positive or negative emotion doesn't mean it's a positive or negative morally. Emotions are in and of themselves, they're not sinful. It's what we allow them to motivate us to do and what we allow them to do. So they should never be in control of us. They should be indicators to us. And sometimes we can have misguided emotions. I'm mad at Jim, but really he had he called me out at work, and so I'm really mad at him. But he actually had a good point. And so it's like, he's actually in the right. And dang it, he's right. Yeah, okay, fine, he's right. But I'm still mad about it. I'm still going to be mad. But as long as I don't, go bite off Jim's head about it or something like that, okay, it's okay. So you're allowed to be mad. You're allowed to have even misguided emotions. Okay, just do something good with it, and you can do it. So I always say, angry Hail Marys are beautiful Hail Marys. You angry? Say some prayers with it. Turn it towards God. And so we can turn any emotion towards God and turn it towards good. Jesus got angry. Jesus had all the emotions. He was a true man. So we can have emotions, all of them. Sexual desire. You're married. You have that sexual desire. It starts bubbling up towards someone, not your spouse. Okay, I need to go say a rosary now, and I need to direct this. I need to go spend some more time with my wife or my husband. And so it's okay. The sexual desire is natural. Okay, what do I do with it? If I turn it towards some impure action, okay, that could be morally wrong. But if I turn it towards prayer, if I turn it towards, I think I need to go spend some more time with my spouse. Well, suddenly you're spending more time with your spouse. Okay, so we can do that. So same thing with temptations. Temptations are not morally good or evil. It's, again, whether we fall into them. So, if we have, you can have good inclinations to do moral good, but that doesn't justify doing a bad thing. Like we said earlier, the ends don't justify the means. In the same way, we can have a temptation, and a temptation does not justify a bad act. Well, I really wanted to. Doesn't matter. So, but at the same time, if we don't give in to the temptation, we haven't done that thing. So my petty little example I always like to use is, every time I go into a convenience store or a gas station, literally every single time, there's a little voice in the back of my head that goes, you could steal a candy bar and get away with it. Every single time I do. Now, I have never stolen a candy bar, so I'm not a thief. Now, I have the inclination, I have the temptation, but I don't do it because because I know it's wrong, because I've formed my conscience based on how I've been raised in the church and all that other good stuff. So I know it's morally wrong, so I don't do it. So that doesn't mean I don't want to do it. I want to do it literally every single time, but I know it's wrong. So that's obviously a petty little example. And so in our own lives too, well, I really wanted to. It's not a very good excuse. So it's like, okay, but is it right? And so it's like, again, we have to be the masters of our desires. We have to be the masters of our emotions, and we have to do it. So it's all about that choice. It's what are we choosing to do? So that kind of sums up all of that kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, remember that it's the act itself, the circumstances around the act, and our motivation, and all have to be aligned towards the good, and that what makes a good act. Okay, we'll open up to questions. If you want to throw out some hypothetical situations, we can do it, but if we get too deep into the weeds, I might say we'll talk later about it. So any questions, about Christian moral principle? This was supposed to be just the outline of like it in general. With my RCIA group, we're going to meet specifically to go over some more specific things about in our culture today and all that kind of stuff. But for this one, it's mostly to be the bigger outline of how we determine if something is morally good or not so much of these are the good things, these are the bad things. But we can talk about whatever you guys want. So any questions? Yes.
The question I have, and you might not want to answer it, but the question I have is, in that context where we have to look at things and judge the act, judge the circumstance, judge, what the intent was, there is a judgment there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how can Christians and Catholics, in front of the world and a pope who gets on a plane and is asked a very straightforward question, says, who am I to judge? Because he had an obligation to stop, because the act is immoral. And so, how does that play off in the world? How does it play off in people sitting here? Because he didn't stop. He should have said, the act is immoral. Not judging the person because of the condition or the way they feel or all of that, the emotion, but the act should have been very clear. This is immoral, and therefore it is immoral to move in that direction. We don't judge the person and why they're in that, but the act is. And the problem I see with that is that everything he said, he didn't do that. And it resonated across the church, at least a lot of people that I know.
Okay, I'm gonna catch you up. I understand your concern. I'm just gonna say one of the biggest problems, especially when we're dealing with anything that's in public concern, is okay. I don't know what he was trying to say, especially because it was said in a different language, and so this is again one of those circumstances where it's like, I'm not even going to take that specific circumstance. I'm going to take that like you can use this for anything, especially if you're talking in public. Anything can be constrayed one way or the other. So we can say, could it have been in any situation? Could it have been said better? Probably. Was he actually trying to? And I'm speaking in general. Was that person trying to actively misinterpret? Or people trying to do it and that kind of stuff. So it's again, this is where it's like, I'm not going to judge because I don't know the motivation. I don't know what it was trying to say. Could it have been better if said in lots of circumstances? Probably, but yeah.
Because I hear what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
However, what happened is people started saying the
Yes. So the question was, and okay, I'm going to take all the circumstances out of that question because that puts it in the weeds, and let's answer the question itself. So the question is, when we see an immoral act, do we have the obligation to call it out? Yes, but that does depend on the circumstances involved, because if it's only going to cause more problems, then that gets back to the second area of like the circumstances. So, if I know, okay, let's say I can use a real world example. So me and my siblings and all that kind of stuff, one of my siblings does something that I don't think is probably the best thing to do. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's not the best thing. But I know if I say anything, he's going to take it in the worst possible way, and it's going to be taken in not the thing. And I know I probably have something that if somebody tried to correct me on something, I would probably do it in that same way too. So my point is, we are all in different positions, and so we're all in different ways of having to understand the full reaction of our words and our actions. So, okay, I'm gonna told you. I understand. We'll go get a beer and talk about this more sometime, and I'll happy to do it. We're gonna, like I said, in this, we're gonna get lost in the weeds. If you've been to enough of my masses and homilies, I've talked about it in homilies and things like that. This is not putting the head in the sand. This is not putting the head in the sand. Good. Don't put your head in the sand. And I literally said during this we should call out people, including priests and leaders of the church. So I've literally said that in this one. So there is a way of doing that appropriately too, because we don't want to go so far in the other extreme. So again, you can have the people who are so against, like, let's go do slavery again, because we can all agree slavery is a moral evil. You had people who were going around trying to, and you had this, like, extremists who were going around and, like, trying to, like, murder slave owners and things like that. You can take things to too extreme and all that kind of stuff. That's probably not the right way of handling the situation. So I'm not saying anyone is doing it what it's right or wrong. Again, because I'm not going to say the thing. The church has an obligation to speak the truth. I am happy to say, yeah, abortion is wrong. I think I've said that a bunch of times. I don't think that. No, you're fine. This is just. You're right, and you're right in that. Like, we could all be better about calling ourselves out. The question becomes how you do that in an appropriate way, and how do you do that in the most effective way? Because that's the other thing too. When we're trying to, combat evil, moral evil, we also have to think about is this going to be effective? Because it's not worth being a martyr just to be a martyr. So we be a martyr because we are supposed to stand up for what's right and because it's going to create a change in this world. So we do it in what's going to be effective. And sometimes there's arguments about how the effective way is to handle that. And again, I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong. I can say, I've preached on this. But my point is, though, when we talk about, that's why we can say just because someone is approaching it in a different way doesn't mean that they're not concerned or they're not handling it in the way that we think is best. That can be, it's a slippery slope to do it. So again, I'm not even disagreeing with you. I'm not disagreeing with you in that what I'm saying is that we need to be careful that we don't get so mad at evil that we don't call out and hope for good. So again, we don't want to go out and kill Saul, because then he never gets a chance to become Paul. So what is our answer? We go and convert Saul. And that's messy, and and sometimes it feels ineffective, and sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it sucks, but that's what we do.
The issue is, though, Father, is that the systemic problem is in the church. Because you cannot change the world unless the church gets it right.
The church has always had systemic problems. Okay, you're fine. Like I said, we can get lost in the weeds, and we could go all night. We'll go out and get a drink sometime, because I don't actually disagree with you. And it's just one of those, how we speak about it matters, is very careful. Because it's very easy to get, because someone else is, you don't want to be, because someone else is extreme, it justifies my extremeness, or forces me to become extreme. We don't want to do that. I'm not saying you're doing that, but what I'm saying is we have to be careful about how we handle it so we can do that. Okay. We'll go get a beer sometime and talk in more detail. Any other questions about anything I said tonight, or any kind of other things we want to chat about? Okay. Let's end in prayer then. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end, amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Okay, I need to see my RCIA people in the back, and everyone else have a very good night. God bless.